Hey everyone, it's Vicki Weber from At Home Author, and I'm super excited because today I've got a guest with us who is going to completely change your mindset and help you get to where you want to be with your writing. We have Christine here, and Christine, I would love for you to introduce yourself for us.
I'm going to give you the spiel I've been practicing, Vicki. So, hi everyone. I'm Christine Carron, your go-to writing productivity coach, and I am also a writer and the founder of Goodjelly, where I help writers take charge of their writing adventure using smart process, grounded power, and inner kindness.
Well, I would love to know. So, when it comes to writing, I think one of the hardest things is when you know you have all of these ideas and you either can't get them on the page or you do, and it just turns into this hamster wheel of being unhappy with what you're producing, or the words just plain old don't come to you. So I would love to know more about like what you do and how you help people actually get past that, because that's a huge hurdle.
Right. So, what's interesting about my program is I never read a writer's work. I don't teach any craft. You never have to share your work in my program. You never have to read anybody else's work in my program. We're 100% focused on the art and craft of getting writing done, of building sustainable creative productivity on the writing adventure. And it's a little bit unique. I have a background in process improvement, in productivity, in project management, and I'm taking the same principles that I use to help highly creative teams produce consistently and saying, why aren't we teaching writers this? Why aren't we teaching writers this? And I find it almost there was probably like a spark of no, stop, that resulted in me creating Goodjelly, because I'm a writer too. I go to the writing conferences. I listen to how what writers are taught about productivity, and it's usually a side thought. I'll teach you craft, and here's a productivity tip. And I also read the same books that we read about writing and about the writer's life, and I'm like, this is just, a lot of it is not helpful. And so uh, and I'm just looking at that very practically. And so what I found is, and this is in a very simplified nutshell, I'm going to describe how I feel most writers are spoken to and taught to speak to themselves about being blocked or not somehow magically just producing at this highest level where birds are, flittering around you, and it's pure communion with your art. So let's say we have a writer over here, and she's a little puzzled because it's not going quite as flowy as she thought it would be. And over here is this magical state of flow where, and probably most writers have had those moments where it does feel like, wow, like this is what I was meant to be doing and the words are coming. But we have to know how to create that, right? Because it doesn't always work. And so what I find is this is this is the advice we get. Come on, do it. Get your butt in the chair. It's just right there. Do it. And I'm like, when I look at it, I see a completely different picture, because and I perceive that the writer in this moment of like, but I can't get there. And then the inner critic comes in and the pusher comes in and it just snowballs on us. So, but the thing is, I don't see it this way. This is what I see. That there's this chasm that is keeping writers from getting to flow. And everybody just keeps saying step, but they're thinking, if I step, right into that chasm I go. So what Goodjelly teaches is the bridge. So this is Goodjelly. This to me is what smart process is, grounded power is, inner kindness, all this working together. Goodjelly becomes the bridge. And then what I teach in my program is, look, here's the bridge. And now I'm going to show you how to keep creating it over and over. Because the reality is, if you are engaged on the writing adventure, which I believe most writers are, they are committed. They want to get their story out, their book out. They want to reach that reader that is waiting for their words. So it's not a question of commitment or wanting it enough. It's just nobody's teaching you the bridge. And another analogy I use is there's a poem that I love by Marge Percy called "To Be of Use," and the whole poem is this beautiful ode to just doing the work, not the sexy bottom line work, not standing in front and unpacking your finished book, but she calls it the mud and the muck. So it's totally not sexy in theory, but I teach writers the mud and muck of getting their writing done. But I just want to raise my hand. If the mud and the muck work gets you to the sexy, then suddenly the mud and muck work is a little sexier. And the writers in my program, I'm sorry, I'm just so excited, Vicki. The writers in my program get delighted because suddenly what felt so hard becomes easy.
So when you have people come to you and you're hearing, when you're hearing these things, what are like the common, I guess, symptoms? What are the common frustrations that you're seeing from people besides I just can't get my book done? Because if I'm thinking about my own work, if I'm frustrated that I can't get the words on the page, I feel like it's so much more than that, than just words.
So tell me what it feels like to you.
Well, I guess for me, it would probably be like, I mean, I know the times that I've dealt with it have felt like I'm failing to communicate or I'm failing to reach my dreams or make whatever impact I wanted with my books. Um yeah, I think that's what I would say about my own, at least from my from my own
Yeah.
brain.
So the so I said earlier that I don't teach any writing, I don't teach any craft. But I always tell writers there are three things you have to take charge of to ace the writing adventure, separate from craft and your ideas and stuff. And that's your work, your process of getting your work done, and your mindset. And so we work on these three different levels, and I teach them. A lot of writers, a big problem with a lot of writers is they get tripped up and are so over focused on writing that they minimize the activities, the work that would help them get the writing done. So, you hear stories like a writer will have just figured out, okay, maybe like I think outlining will help me. And then that writer goes to a conference and hears some VIP, very important industry professional, say, "Oh, if you outline, it just sucks all the life and voice out of your writing." And then the writer's kind of less meaning, but it was actually helping me, but I guess that's not what real writers do. And then there's another writer who maybe was over organized and was thinking like maybe some brainstorming things would help or just like a lightness. And then that writer goes to a conference and here's a completely different VIP say, if you don't outline your work, then it's just going to ruin it. So I don't care how you get it done. I care that we figure out what will help you get it done.
You
And
know what?
that
And as a teacher, I think that's so important because I work with a lot of teachers too, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, you have no problem, making adjustments and making accommodations and doing all these things for your students, and then you don't do the same thing for yourself. And I've
Right.
been guilty of that before, but one of my tips, but this is something that works for me. It doesn't work for everybody. I'm constantly running around and doing stuff. And I don't always have the time to like sit at a computer and write because I usually get sidetracked. So what I like to do is I actually open up a Google Docs app in my phone and I use the little talk to text voice
Yeah.
note
Yeah.
thing. And that's something that for me helps remove that small barrier to just getting the
Right.
words down. Now, what I do with them after that, that's an entirely different process. And
Right. Right. But
but that's
what,
something that came of my super busy schedule and something that works for me based on, what's going on in my everyday life. And everybody should be thinking about that within themselves.
and so how you're just inviting me to put all my little frameworks up. So another framework that I talk about in sorting out what's yours is kind of what you're referring to, and I call it what is your code and what is your context. What's your current creative code? What is useful for you right now?
Mhm.
What helped me get my writing done and how I needed to get my stories down when I started out as a writer is different than now that I know more. So my creative code is a little bit different. And I hope as a writer, and I hope for all writers, you have a growth mindset around your creative code. Not that, I will never be one to outline. I'm always going to be a pantser. That is who I am versus what does my project need? Maybe I can experiment. Is there a halfway plot I can do so I can be a plotter slash pantser, to be playful and to experiment and to allow growth around your creative code. But you're absolutely right. A lot of writers totally do not pay attention to their context, even to like a change from week to week. So I had a writer in my
Mm.
program and she came in one day and she said, oh, my in-laws are totally cramping my writing productivity. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, they're visiting and I just can't get my writing done. And I said, okay. I said, first of all, are you happy they're coming? Yeah, I really like them. So, hey, she's happy to have them visit. Great. She didn't like ignore a boundary. She was happy to have them. And I said, did you know that they were coming, or is this a surprise visit? She said, I knew they were coming. I said, did you make your plans for the week as if they weren't coming, but just expected yourself to cram the same amount of work into the time period you would have had? And then by that point, we were both laughing, and she said, yes. I said, your in-laws are not cramping your style. You not taking ownership of your context and setting boundaries with yourself and setting fair expectations of yourself that, hey, if you have people visiting for 3 days, you're probably going to have to make an adjustment to your plan for your writing that week. And that doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're planning smartly. And so that can happen from week to week, or what you're talking about, someone just completely, it's like they don't matter on their writing adventure. The reality of their life doesn't matter. And what I teach people is that's the bridge. That's part of what's keeping you. That's why you feel like you have a chasm, you know?
Well, one of my issues for a while too is I used to set these really lofty goals, not even just with writing, with everything. I would set all these lofty goals. I'm going to do like 100 things every day of the week, always and forever. And I don't know why I did that. It sounded like a good idea at the time. And then all that led to was obviously me missing the mark because there's only so many hours in the day. And so I wasn't hitting goals. And then I felt guilty because I just felt like I was constantly failing at these things I was trying to achieve. And it wasn't until I actually was like, okay, well, isn't it better if I pleasantly surprise myself by overachieving rather than constantly underachieving. Why do I need to be doing 100 things a day? Why can't I be doing two or three? Or
Right.
depending on the week, like you're saying, no 2 weeks look alike. They
For
just
most
don't.
people, for most people, some writers have more consistency, but a lot of writers will always say, I don't even have time for your program, Christine. And I'm like, mm, time's not the problem. This freaks writers out when it freaks corporate people out when I say this, considering I'm a project manager and productivity expert. People think I'm going to be like all over time. But most time management stuff isn't even about time. It's about prioritization. It's about expectation setting and boundaries of yourself and others. And so if it were truly about time, then automatically, a writer who is retired from a day job who has 3-hour blocks of time every day should automatically be producing more than a writer who has an hour or two a week. Because I work with writers who work full time, have a partnership, spouse, have children, and their reality is they have 2 hours of time for their writing a week. And those writers can make progress with my process. And the writers with 3 hours that can make a day can make progress. But we're solving the same problem, because having more time does not solve a problem that you don't know how to manage the full scope of your writing work. You don't have smart writing work processes. Why? Not because there's anything wrong with you, because no one has ever holistically taught this before. And you don't have the tools to stay in charge of your mindset, to work effectively with your inner critic, your inner perfectionist, your inner pusher or inner maxer, which you were playing with when you were like, I'm going to do 100 things a day, right?
Well, and that's the thing for me is I've always been super driven and I've never had a problem with that, but I'm almost that way to a fault. And other people have the opposite problem. Like they struggle to motivate themselves or believe in themselves. And then there's just as many people that fall in the middle and flip-flop to one side or the other
Right.
depending on the day or their situation.
Right. But most people, um, I'm just full of frameworks. Another thing I have writers pay attention to is their natural productivity style, which is part of their code usually. But again, that can change. And so to me, there's a healthy range of writing productivity. And on one side is what I call steadies. And these are people who just truly are served by daily, this just consistency. But there are many writers, myself included, who are sergers.
Mm.
And who are going to work in waves. The norm, the expectation is that if you're not writing daily, you're not a real writer. Like we get that subliminal message in all the time. But to me, if you're a steady, have that daily word count goal, work that, honor that. But as sergers, I tell, have a weekly word count goal. It's still a short enough time frame, but it allows for variability. And one of the writers in my program, really, because we hear it so often, like, you have to write every day. She finally admitted, she's like, I think I'm more of a serger than I kind of want to be. And I'm like, who cares if you're a serger? She's tearing up the floor on her progress, but she's still dealing with that mindset thing of that she should be doing something else, even though she's making progress. That's what my program is about, to continue to play with those edges, not in a harsh way, like to delight in, oh my gosh, there comes my mindset, goofiness again. And so knowing this and playing with your edges and honoring that and figure out ways to make progress, because what I tell people all the time, sorry, activity doesn't equal productivity. I can have a writer who writes every day who never gets to the end of a first draft. And there can be a writer who does surges, but is actively managing small surges instead of saying, well, I'll just check in the end of the year if I surged. She's setting weekly, it's still small enough to manage. The problem is nobody in general, our culture is so do. it's uncomfortable for us to play here in a healthy productivity style, because what everybody wants to be is a maxer. Go hard all the time, hardcore, sleep at the office, do it. I'm going to do 100 things a day, right? What this puts you in is this, what is this? This vertical ping pong between maxing and burned out. Can you still see that? And burned out. And so people are like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Well, first of all, you start to freeze up because your brain starts to go, I can't do it. I can't do it. And to your point, it's a better mindset hack to say, let me make this easy. And that's a question I say all the time. You ask yourself, how can I make this easy? And let's face it, when you're burnt out, there is no progress whatsoever. None whatsoever. And then your inner critic is piling on. And so what I always, yes, we absolutely, the terminology. And the thing is with most people's, when I can pretty much guarantee if I would have analyzed from a productivity, from a process perspective, the 100 things on your list, there were probably 500 to 1,000 things on that list because you had made the task so big that they would have taken you a week or two. So you feel overburdened by the pure number, but even when you start to tackle one, it feels burdensome because it's just like such a drag to get it done. So what I teach writers is to make manageable, movable bits of work. That's one of they just know that term, manageable, movable bit, that it is so little and so easy, you almost feel embarrassed. But I have writers in just a couple weeks who come into my program, in some cases have been blocked for 3 decades on a writing project, or wanted to write their nonfiction book on intuition for 24 years and could never make progress, so much so that it's kind of an ongoing joke in her family, which adds to the mindset challenges that she has to have. And now that writer is just trucking along, and the words that are sometimes used, they're in shock, and it's so easy, it feels like they're doing something wrong, because we're so convinced that it's hard to be a writer. We have to suffer to be a writer. There are creative endeavors. I mean, I am not downplaying what a writer is doing when they're putting their heart on the page, but so does an artist. So does a TV presenter who's perhaps going out into a war zone and risking their lives, or a doctor. Let me tell you, brain surgery is an art, so this sense at times I don't think serves writers that it's so special. And that's why I say you got to get good at the mud and the muck. But so many writers, like, oh no, I'm just going to sit in the garret and move to flow. And I'm not being hard on you. I mean, I have to fight with those images of what I think a writer should be, but they don't serve us as writers, because any writer who is truly engaged in the writing adventure knows that there's like a rhythm to it. There's a work aspect to it. It's not all this romantic, let me light my candle and have my inkwell, and just the words are just going to flow in magic perfection and every metaphor is going to land perfectly. It's work. And how awesome that there's all these tools to help us get our work done if writers just had access to them. And that's my mission.
I love that, because I really do think that, if you've already decided that you can't, then you won't, and it doesn't have to stay that way. It doesn't have to be that way. If you have a story idea or something you've been working on, there's a reason for that. And it could be for a million possibilities. It could even just be that it's important to you, or that you want to make an impact on somebody, or represent something, or tell an untold story. It could be serious, it could be funny, it could be sentimental. There's so many reasons that you could be writing. but you have to take the steps and set yourself up for success, and sometimes that's not always easy to do on your own. And I think that that's why it's so important to seek out the resources and really learn as much as you can, and find the places where you'll get the support system, where you'll be able to learn, where you'll be able to make adjustments. Because if you can't even diagnose the problem, then you're
Right.
going to struggle to
Right.
solve it.
Right. And so many, this is to me such a black hole. This is like this, it's like this collective blind spot in the writing world on just the basics of process. And sometimes writers are like, oh, no, process, it's going to crush my creativity. And they've probably been burned by harsh process, like you have to plot your book this way, or you have to. And I'm like, first of all, that's not smart process. First of all, if a process is not unleashing your creativity, your productivity, your delight, which that is my vision for Goodjelly, that a world where all writers are delighting in their creative process. So yours is going to look different from mine, but we can both use these underlying concepts and tools to find our sweet spot. And if it's not, if process isn't doing that for you, one, it's the wrong process. Ditch the process and trust your gut on that. Sometimes when I go, and I love listening to other writers talk about their process, because I'm a process improvement consultant, so I'm always like looking for ideas, but I also trust myself. Sometimes I hear something and it feels like a hard no, like that's like a no, like never. And those are usually things that involve like harshness. You know what I mean? Like you have to kill your inner critic. And I'm thinking, no, you don't. Your inner critic's on your side, which totally wilds people out. So there are things that I have hard no's to. And then there are things like I have like, mm-mm, but there's some other little part of me that says, there's probably something there for you to learn. And I'm like, not now. And I just honor the not now. And then there are other things that I'm like, yes. And if I go with the yes first, because then that can move me forward. And that may get me to the insight where I'm like, oh, now I understand why I couldn't let that other thing go. But I had to get to a new level of learning about craft, about my story. I had to move forward before I could understand something that came in to help me in the past. And the other thing that I just have to, it kind of tickles me when writers are like, no, process. And I'm like, but y'all, you're involved in something called the creative process. So it probably would make sense on how to do good process. So yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. This is
Well,
I
and I think too, I think we're just so inclined a lot to, like, we see somebody successful. We see like this book that we love, this author that we love, this creative that we love, and we're like, I want to be just like them. And then we try to do exactly what they do, or, because if it worked for them, it'll work for us. And I think at the end of the day, it's so important to recognize that, we're unique, and that's a good thing. And the more you lean into that and you recognize that, and figure out what it is, like you said, that motivates you, that gets you to that creativity. There's a lot more to it, but if that's your goal, to get to that place, you got to
yeah,
start with recognizing your own uniqueness.
right. And I would say so this comes up a lot. We talk about what what um what is the myth you're holding in your head about like the writer you should be. And sometimes I say to writers, it's the writer you think you should be getting in the way of the writer you're supposed to be.
Hmm.
And so if and writers will have different like idols, like who they admire. But when I'm just really practical, because you talk about uniqueness, which I agree with. And I think, though I could be wrong, you're talking kind of about the spark, the person's stories and a person's, and maybe you're too talking about what it is to me, like your whole life experience. So if I have an image in my head of the writer I want to be, Kate DiCamillo, I write Young Adults, and I would love to just, I would, wow, and then I mean, imagine those are the same size. I'm not saying anything about, because clearly Kate to Camilla, you know what I mean? But if here's Kate and here's me, most likely, if I'm drawn to her, if something is inspiring me about her, there's probably some overlap. But the reality is, I could go. I mean, how cool would that be to like do a process analysis of Kate DiCamillo's work or Neil Gaiman's work? Like to just follow. I mean, that's what I do in the corporate world. I follow people around and jobs around to and document what they're doing. But the reality is, Kate DiCamillo has had a whole life of experience that I don't have access to. And whatever little sliver I can see to try to repeat, there's no way I can repeat it because I can't see this whole circle. And if I spend all my time trying to do that, I'm negating and not leveraging all my own experiences. So when I work with my writers in the program, I teach them the process of progress, but at all times, there's so many ways. I used to work at TGI Fridays. I don't know if it still happens at TGI Fridays, but you would wear all these buttons and they would call it flair. The little buttons were like your flair. And so we would all have the same uniform on, black bottoms, black shoes, the red and white striped shirt. But then everybody would have these different buttons. So to me, that's what smart process has to have. The uniform, the sameness, because there is smart process that will move you forward. But at all times, it has to have room for each writer's flair. And if I spend all my time in an impossible task to try to mimic Kate DiCamillo's process, because I don't have access to her experience. I don't have access to the practice she's done for the writing speed to figure out what works for her. Like she probably did trial and error like you did to figure out right now in my current life circumstance, making those little Google Doc notes is useful for me. That was an experiment where, if I were trying to pattern myself after you, I don't know if that would work. I have a different context, right? And so the sad part of me is that for me, but I also think but it's so awesome because like once writers learn this, then you get to embrace and take joy in like the adventure of figuring out the writer who you are. That is so awesome to me, because the more you align to the writer who you're supposed to be, the more you're going to become the perfect vessel for the stories, for the words, for the books that are supposed to come out of you. One of the writers said, "You're so passionate, Christine." I said, "I know." Because I think what an honor it is. First of all, I get a front row seat to writers' processes. I don't know if other people find that fascinating. I find it fascinating and such a deep honor for writers to come in front of me and be courageous enough to say, this is what I want to do, and this is what is getting in my way. And it sucks. It sucks when we're feeling like we just can't get it and we start to feel incompetent or, am I missing some craft thing? Do I not want it enough? Is this ever going to happen for me? And I'm like, and to be able to be part of them getting back into their groove, getting back into their power, getting back into their flow, and just feeling joyful and almost like giddy with the progress they're making, and just saying like I get to be part of people getting books into the world. Like, that's cool.
No, I love that, and I'm really glad that you came on. I know I'm walking away with a couple of gems. I hope anyone still watching is walking away with some as well. In the description box below will be more details on how to find Christine if you have any questions or are interested in her program. Any last tips for us, Christine, before we get going?
Just enjoy the adventure. Enjoy the adventure. And you've got this.